Today we review The Kings of the Wyld and The Bloody Rose. Hello and welcome to All Booked Up. Welcome if you're new to the channel. Today we are going to be doing a review of two books, the first two books of the Banned series, the only two that are currently out. This series is by Nicholas Eames, the first book being Kings of the Wyld and the second book being Bloody Rose. So let's jump straight in. First off, we are going to be talking about the Kings of the Wyld. This is going to hopefully give you a little bit of intro to the world, a little bit of an idea of how it starts off, and then I'm going to give you my thoughts on it before we then jump in to the sequel. So, Kings of the Wyld takes place in a very typical fantasy, almost D&D-esque world. In this world, mercenary bands are treated very much as celebrities. They are, think rock bands of the 70s and 80s, particularly the 70s. They are big stars and they are big celebrities in this world. They are known to fight creatures out in the wild, but also they fight in arenas. They sort of book big gigs and tours where they go from town and city to city, fighting different creatures in arenas in front of packed stadiums. So very much like rock bands. Kings of the Wyld follows Slowhand Clay Cooper and his former bandmates from the band Saga. Saga broke up 20 years past. They are legends now, old and fat and past it. Kings of the Wyld starts when Saga frontman Golden Gabe comes and knocks on Clay Cooper's door and tells him that he is getting the band back together. So from this immediately we can see the setup is going to be very light-hearted, somewhat comedic, and it is very much tropey. It is a tropey adventure based on classic fantasy tropes. It is there to be fun and enjoyed, and there are a lot of 70s band references sprinkled throughout that Nicholas Eames leaves as Easter eggs for us, for those who know about classic rock. I personally didn't catch too many of them, but yeah, they are definitely there if that is your style of music. One of the real strengths with Kings of the Wyld is Eames's characters. So every member of Saga we meet is a wonderful character. Some of them are amazingly well beloved. Clay Cooper is the steady rock and heartbeat of Saga, very much the bass player. Gabe is the front man. He's extravagant, he's loud, he's brash. We've got Matrick, who is essentially the drummer, who is a rogue. And then Ganalan is the axeman. And then we have everyone's favourite Arcadius Moog, who is an old wizard who is just a bit mental. He is a wonderful character, as are the entire band. They all have their own quirks, their own personalities, and throughout this book you will probably grow to absolutely love Saga and what all these characters are about. By about halfway through Kings of the Wyld, I knew I was going to love this book. I was having a great time. It was fun, it was lighthearted, it was enjoyable. It actually made me laugh out loud, which books struggle to do often. I was flying through it and I really thought that it was going to be a great, enjoyable, fun time read that I was going to look back on fondly and have lots of laughs along the way. Nicholas Eames really lured me into this with Kings of the Wyld. He lured me into thinking it was a fun D&D style romp, and that was what it was going to be. As we passed that halfway mark, as the plot started to unfold, I realised there was more going on here. I realised that this was going to be more than just a rollicking romp through Fantasyland, but Eames was really starting to build characters who I had an emotional connection with. I realised the first half hadn't just been there for giggles and for fun, but it was building character groundwork that I could get really emotionally invested in. I started to really feel for these characters and love these characters. And that meant that as the story progressed, as the stakes started to be raised, there were actually some really strong emotional reactions I had to these characters and to the situation they were in. It amazed me how the paradigm could shift in such a way that not only was this book a fun comedy and a romp, and I loved the characters, but actually it started to make me really feel strong emotions for what was going on, for what these characters were going through. And that is an amazing turn to put in this book. It's not a massive plot twist or anything, but actually the tone, while still being lighthearted and fun, actually really managed to make me feel something for these characters and actually brought a tear to my eye. So while in many ways Kings of the Wyld is a comedy, or it is certainly a comedic fantasy, I don't think you should go in just expecting that. There is a wonderful set of themes at work, and there's wonderful character work going on that actually leads to incredibly emotional beats as we come to the conclusion of this story. For me, Kings of the Wyld was a 5-star read. I absolutely adored it. I can see how some people would not enjoy it, however. So there are some issues you might have with this world and with the writing of Kings of the Wyld. So, the world is very tropey fantasy. Any fantastical creature you can think of probably exists. If you are a D&D player, if you scrolled through the D&D monster manual, you'll find most of these creatures in the Kings of the Wyld. And that's fine. That's something that some people will struggle with. Some people won't like the lack of originality. But actually, if you can get past that, it's fine, and it's a good setting for this world. As well as that, the plot can be pretty tropey. If you have read fantasy for a long time, if you know your fantasy genre, you will see a lot of tropes here. And you should know that going in. If that's something that's going to wind you up, if that's going to annoy you, it might not be for you. I do, however, think that Nicholas Eames manages to play on these tropes in a way that is enjoyable, and actually we're not going in for a super grimdark story. This isn't about being gritty and real and dark. It's about having a fun time, and actually using those tropes, playing on those tropes, is absolutely fine as far as I'm concerned. I would hard recommend Kings of the Wyld to you if you have not started this series. Now, moving on to Bloody Rose. So Bloody Rose is a sequel. It happens about 6 years after the events of Kings of the Wyld. Now, it is not a true sequel in the sense of we are not really following the same characters. We have a whole new cast of characters that we are following. We do get the odd cameo from some of the characters from Kings of the Wyld, but this is very much a different story for a different band, a different set of characters. So while it is a continuation in the series, it's not a true sequel, so to speak. In Bloody Rose, we follow the main character of Tam. Now, she is a teenage girl. She idolises the mercenary bands of her day and that pass through her town, and she dreams of being a part of one. This is actually something that her parents did when they were younger, and it's something that she yearns to be involved with. I will say, for Bloody Rose, Nicholas Eames manages to do an amazing feat here. So not only does he continue to build the world that we saw in Kings of the Wyld, not only does that feel consistent and continue to be built, but actually the tone does shift slightly. Now, as we are following an up-and-coming band, we are following this band Fable, there is a very different slant to how we view the world. With Saga in Kings of the Wyld, they were old hands. They were retired, they'd done it all, they'd seen it all before. Now, this is very different when we get to Bloody Rose, when we are following a young teenage girl who everything is new, everything is a different experience. And actually, that perspective on things really does impact how we view the world. Bloody Rose, for much of it, feels much more serious. Now, I know what I've just said about Kings of the Wyld is that towards the end, it does feel more serious and it gets more emotional impact. Bloody Rose feels a bit more like that from the start. It didn't make me laugh as often, particularly at the beginning. It felt light-hearted, but not as comedic. And actually, it took me a little while longer to really feel connected to this new band we were following. As we progress through the story, we have a little bit of a travel log for a lot of the start of this book. As that comes towards an end, that's when I really started to feel like I understood our characters. I understood the members of this band. And I think that Bloody Rose does a really good job of slowly building up those characters so we understand them. It layers on nuance as we go, and as our perspective character gets to know the band around her more and more, we manage to see more and more nuances of these characters in a way that is really rewarding as we continue on through this story. Now, whereas Kings of the Wyld deals with this band and whether or not they are past it, can they still do what they used to do in their prime, Bloody Rose is very much a story of proving yourself, of coming up, living up to expectations. And I think one of the really strong points of Bloody Rose as a continuation from Kings of the Wyld is that it manages to work themes into the story really incredibly well. So one of the big themes is this idea of proving yourself, living up to expectations. How do you manage that? Can you do that? But there are so many other wonderful themes that Nicholas Eames manages to weave in here, and he handles very delicately. So I was not expecting us to deal with the themes of family and parenthood in the way that we do. I certainly wasn't expecting themes of dealing with addiction, things about how identity and how we are perceived by the world. These are things I was not expecting us to handle in this book, and I was not expecting to be handled as well as they were. What I will say is Bloody Rose for me, again, is another 5-star book. This series is in my top 10 series of all time. I absolutely loved it. It is very different, however, from Kings of the Wyld. I will say the fact that I had a couple of months gap between reading these two books actually was a real positive for me. It allowed me to come fresh to Bloody Rose with a slightly different perspective, not bringing all the stuff from Kings of the Wyld with me, but actually just enjoying it for the story it was telling me. I would definitely say that Kings of the Wyld works as a standalone, but Bloody Rose is a good standalone sequel, if you see what I mean. It is different, but it is just as enjoyable, if in a slightly different way for me. So yeah, both of these books are 5-star reads for me. I cannot wait for the third book in the band series to be coming, but when it comes, I will read it straight away. I absolutely adore this world, I adore these characters, and I adore Nicholas Eames' writing style. I hope that has given you a good insight into these books in a spoiler-free review. Like the video if you like it, subscribe if you want to, and I will see you next time.